Drop shadows, the effect that everyone hates to love. But it's true, everyone loves drop shadows because they give a sense of depth to a page. They make things pop. Let's see how you can make drop shadows in InDesign. I'm going to select this image here, this photographer, and I'm going to put a drop shadow behind him. You can apply a drop shadow to any object on your page. Images, text, lines, doesn't matter. In this case, I'm going to do it to a graphic. You can apply a drop shadow in one click by going up to the control panel and clicking on this little drop shadow button. But when you do that, you almost always get a clunky, yucky shadow. I don't like doing it that way. I want to have more control over my drop shadow. So I'm going to turn that off, and instead I'm going to go over just a little bit to the Effects pop-up menu. Here I can choose Drop Shadow, and that's going to open a dialog box that gives me a lot of control. I can get to the same dialog box in the Effects panel down here at the bottom. There it is, same pop-up menu, Effects, Drop Shadow. Now inside the Effects dialog box, I have a lot of control over exactly where this drop shadow sits and how it looks. For example, I can change what color it is and how dense it is. Maybe I'll make this a little bit less dense, bring it down to about 60%. Because the preview checkbox is turned on, I can see all of these changes taking place immediately. I can also change its position. Right now, it's kind of far away from this image. I'm going to make it smaller, maybe about 4 points. And I can change the angle of the drop shadow, that is where it looks like the light is coming from, by dragging this little slider around. I'll bring it back up to the top here. I'm also going to change the size. The size reflects how blurry the drop shadow is, that is, how big the drop shadow itself is. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, like about 8 points, just to kind of blur it out a little bit, make it a little bit more subtle. And the last thing I'm going to do is change the noise. I always like adding a little bit of noise, just 3 or 4%. You don't need very much, but it makes it significantly more natural looking. Now I'll click OK, and I can see the drop shadow behind this guy. Now I know that drop shadow is there, not just because I can see it behind this guy, but because there's an effects icon over here in the effects panel. This effects icon is not just an indicator that there's an effect applied to this object, it's also usable. I can use that to do something. Let me show you. I can drag that little effects icon up onto another object, for example, this logo up here. And when I let go of the mouse, you'll see the drop shadow is applied, even though I didn't even have that object selected on the page. I'll select it now and zoom into 400%, then you can really see it. Here, the effect is too diffuse, it's too subtle. I want to make it a little bit sharper. So I could go back to the Effects pop-up menu and choose Drop Shadow again, or in this case, I'll just double-click on the effects icon. That brings the dialog box up again. Now I'm just changing this object, whichever object on their page is selected. I'm going to make this a little bit darker, and I'm going to make the distance a little bit closer. I'm just tabbing from one field to the next, by the way. And I'm going to make the size smaller. Let's say 3 points. That looks pretty good. Actually, it's still a little bit far away. I'm going to change the distance down to maybe 1.5 points. That looks much better. I still have my noise. Click OK, and I can see that looks pretty good. Drop shadows are cool, but there's no doubt that they can be overused and end up making your document look hackneyed. So proceed with caution.